Could age assurance be the killer app for digital identity? And how different is it really from putting dirty magazines on the top shelf? I'm Joel McConvey. On today's episode of the Biometric Update Podcast, Luciditi's Dan Johnson asks whether we may have found the catalytic use case for digital ID. So we are now 2 months into Ofcom's enforcement of the UK Online Safety Act. And Luciditi is one of the big providers. So to start, I just wanted to ask you for your honest take on how it's gone so far.
So surprisingly, as I say, surprisingly good. There was kind of this worry, really, that the organizations providing age-restricted content didn't really want this to be successful, and also that individuals would be really reticent about sharing their proof of age in order to access age-restricted material on the internet. What we've seen is that a very large number of people seem to be perfectly comfortable with sharing a proof of age. I think the fact that we and everybody else in the market has been talking about how this is privacy preserving. So those individuals are not sharing their name, they're not sharing any information about their bank account, for example, they're not sharing their mobile telephone number or their account details or anything else, or even their name or their address or anything. They're just sharing the fact that they're over the age of 18. So I think people feel comfortable that when we say we don't share this data, that actually we're not sharing any of this data. And also feel comfortable that what we're actually doing here is protecting young people and making sure that they don't inadvertently stumble upon material that they shouldn't really be accessing. There's been quite a lot of discussion about VPNs and how people are circumventing the legislation using virtual private networks. I think that was always going to be a risk. I guess kind of the key point is that if you're actively using a virtual private network in order to circumvent the legislation, then you're not really going to be inadvertently stumbling upon material. You're actively attempting to access it. So I don't see that as being an argument for suggesting that the solution isn't really working the way that we'd intended. And what's kind of really lovely is the UK spearheaded this concept of age assurance when accessing age-restricted material on the internet. And other countries have been watching what has been happening in the UK and are starting to implement their own variation on the UK Online Safety Act, which is fantastic. And ultimately what that means is it kind of doesn't really matter where you VPN to or from, that you're still going to be subject to the same legislation or the same principled legislation, which means that ultimately, globally, we are going to be keeping our young people safe from inadvertently accessing this material. So that was a really long answer to your question, but in summary, we've seen a massive uptick in utility of our services, as we know that other basically our competitors, though the whole market has all seen an uptick in the use of these services, which is great for age assurance generally, but also great for digital identity, because what we're seeing here is a real active, valuable use case for identity, and that's something that we absolutely can build on in the future.
It's actually not that long an answer. You'd be surprised. But so a lot of the attention has been on the online aspect of it. We are trying to prevent kids from stumbling onto pornography or harmful content. But there's a whole other side to this age assurance discussion, which is this promise that Peter Kyle made back in the day now, that in the UK you'd be able to go and prove your age at a pub to buy a pint by Christmas. Now, yes. It's October 2nd. Do you think that's possible? And I know Luciditi has a new product that is sort of intended to try and help this become a reality. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, of course. So the first question, is it possible? So the answer is yes. So we've been working on this for a number of years now to create a product that will enable people to be able to prove their age. As we've just been discussing, we've already rolled that out for online use. The methods really for rolling that out for in-person use are very similar, and one of the key challenges really has been this blocker in terms of the legislation. So the secondary legislation in the UK currently states that you require a plastic card containing a photograph, and a hologram in order to prove your age when purchasing alcohol in person. Don't think that's a verbatim quote of what the secondary legislation says, but it's very close. And so for the first time, you're going to be able to use a digital identity or digital form of age proof in order to purchase alcohol in person. And that requires a statutory instrument to be laid before Parliament, which we understand is imminent. And then there is a discussion period that happens after that. And then it becomes law. And that capability of it becoming law was written into the Data Use and Access Act 2025, which was passed in June. So all of the legislative cogs are all turning in order to make this a reality. So that deals with the legality of being able to use a digital identity to prove your age. In terms of the technical readiness, so we are proven to be ready. We have all of the required certifications under the DIATF, so the Digital Identity and Trust Framework. Probably shouldn't say framework after framework. So we have all of the required certifications. Our technology is ready to go. And what we've developed, which we announced recently, is rather than requiring organizations to go through the same development processes we have and also the same certification processes we have, we've componentized the capability of proving that you're over the age of 18 so that it can be implemented in existing apps that have consumers. So if you're a pub with an app that your consumers use and to kind of order remotely or order from their table, for example, we can implement our component within that app so that those users can immediately gain access to legally being able to prove that they're over the age of 18 when buying a pint within that app, without that pub or organization having to be certified, and without them having to develop all of that capability. So we handle all of that functionality, all of that regulation on behalf of those organizations.
That leads me to, I think, an important question, which is ease of use and adoption. Adoption is the big kind of factor in all of this. If people don't use it, it won't succeed. So the question is, how do you get people to use it? And I feel like, often, even when people are objecting to this stuff, they are objecting to accuracy. They're pointing to, the facial age estimation doesn't work within a certain range. But I feel like the much bigger elephant in the room is usability. In that you present this rule to people and they have to be able to follow it. So it sounds like this is something that is intended to try and really ease that transition for businesses in terms of compliance.
Yeah, exactly. So there's kind of two elements to it, really. One is the ease of compliance and the effort that needs to go into training of staff. In order to be able to accept a physical form of ID, the staff member needs to know what a pass card looks like, what a driving license looks like, and what a passport looks like, and also what a bad one looks like, and whether they should really accept those documents. So they kind of have to become identity specialists in order to be able to accept a document. I was going to say credential, but I'll try and keep it more human. So to be able to accept those documents, and to make sure that they're not accepting fake documents. And we understand that there are a number of fake documents out there for younger people who are trying to get served before they're 18 years old. So what a digital form of age proof does is take away that requirement for that level of training, and that uncertainty about whether the document is genuine or not, by providing a digital proof. In addition, it means that the individual is protected more. So I have a worry that when my children, so that they're both over the age of 18 now, so when they're out with their friends, so they're taking physical forms of documentation with them, and that documentation contains far more information than the bar person or bouncer needs to see. If it's their driving license, for example, then it contains their name, their full date of birth, their home address, their driving entitlement, and so on. That's way more information than is actually required. So there's a data minimization aspect to this, where the receiver, the bar person or the bouncer, is only getting the fact that the person is genuinely over the age of 18, and that the person presenting it is the person that is over the age of 18. So there's no opportunity for that data to be shared somehow, or for devices to be passed back down the line, or for somebody else to intercept the authentication process and kind of allow somebody who's under the age of 18 to get in. So it's more secure, it's more privacy preserving, and it reduces the training and compliance challenges and risks and cost to the organization. So really everybody wins. And then in addition to all of that, we know that there is a desire in the market for young people to be able to use digital forms of proof of age, because they don't want to be carrying out documents. We know that they lose them, and perhaps in some instances they're not just lost; they're actively targeted by criminals who are looking for these documents. So the fact that those the young people then no longer need to carry those documents with them, they're just having that information on their mobile device, means that when they do need those documents, so for example when they're driving, or if it's a passport, when they're going on holiday, there is less risk that they're going to lose that document prior to actually needing that physical document for that purpose.
So there is this desire, I think, among young people to do things digitally. And I think it's almost an inevitability with Gen Z, people who've grown up digital natives. But it's still trying to convince people that this is normal, I think, is the big trick. So do you think there's a sort of a secret sauce for adoption, whether it's communications or some sort of a campaign? Is it just time? What's it going to take to make this normal for people?
Yeah, so definitely a campaign, and that's really kind of in the hands of the identity service providers, potentially in the hands of the government as well, but certainly in the identity service providers and also the organisations. So there's definitely a user experience uplift in using digital forms of age proof for those organisations. So there's advantages in promoting this as a way to prove age, which means that the bar staff are better protected in terms of accepting genuine digital documents or digital credentials rather than the physical credentials. There's also the ability for those organisations to reduce abuse towards staff. So it's much easier if a young person is presenting themselves at a bar, for example, and where the bar staff are then able to say, well, the computer says no. So, it's not me, it's not my opinion. What you've presented is not accepted, and so I'm sorry, we can't serve you. Is a much easier conversation than a more emotive, kind of opinion-based assessment. So we will see that there is a reduction in abuse to staff. So there's a number of reasons why organisations will and should be promoting this form of ID. The other is that, as you said, Gen Z are keen to use their mobile devices. In this context, they use it for everything else, and they certainly have their mobile devices with them when they're out, as we can see from the social media posts. So they do have these devices with them, quite comfortable in using them. They use them to pay for everything when they're out. So why would they not also have their age proof encapsulated within the device? So we think that young people are going to be demanding that organizations accept this form of age proof, as well as organizations wanting to accept this form of age proof because it's easier, the user experience is better, and it's easier to comply and train.
So it sounds like a fairly easy sell to me for in person, right? Like I think the idea that the machine says you're not old enough, so you have to go away, is a very effective kind of evolution of age checks in person. I think with online, you get more people starting to worry that there's going to be overreach and that I'm going to have to check I'm going to prove my age for everything. If I want to go and buy McDonald's, I'm going to have to prove my age to get a Big Mac. What's your sort of message for people who have this concern about overreach and the privacy concerns that tend to come with that?
So on the overreach, I can't see a reason for any organization wanting to require age verification for cheeseburgers. I can't see it as a requirement. And we're seeing that with the Online Safety Act, that organizations that don't provide age-restricted content are not implementing age assurance and don't need to. So there is always going to be that extra bit of friction at the point of entry to a site where you need to prove your age, and we make that as easy as possible with reusable identities, so that once you set up your age proof, you can then just share that with one tap. So that's nice and easy to do, but it's still an extra tap that wasn't really there before. Although in many cases, organizations with age restricted content had a kind of box that said, are you over the age of 18, or sometimes required you to put your date of birth in, which is obviously very easy to circumvent. But so we're kind of replacing that part of the process with a different kind of process. So not really adding to the friction there. So I think people are kind of comfortable with the idea of providing that information and having that kind of level of friction, but not introducing it where it's not really required. So I don't think that there will be much in the way of overreach, particularly as the way that we've implemented this, and part of the way that the certification process requires us to implement this, is in terms of data minimization. So all we're sharing back is the fact that the person is over the age of 18. So from a kind of demographics analysis perspective, that's not really particularly useful. There's not really the data that any organization could say, well, actually, I don't have to implement age assurance, but I'd like to, because I'm going to get loads of data, and that's going to help me profile my customers and kind of provide them with options. But knowing whether the person that purchased the cheeseburger is over 18 or under 18 probably isn't particularly helpful or useful. So I can't really see much in the way of overreach.
So a cheeseburger may have been a bad example. I was thinking specifically, and I guess overreach maybe is the wrong term too. It's like preemptive compliance. So people were saying that Spotify, right? They had to prove their age to listen to stuff on Spotify, which seems maybe to go beyond the intention of the Online Safety Act, or maybe not. And I think that's a question too: is do people understand the scope of this? In implementing it and complying with it.
Yeah, well, I suppose so. Spotify is kind of an interesting one because they do provide explicit content, so explicit lyrics, and there are warnings about the nature of that content, and in the same way as the kind of games industry with the PEGI kind of grading for gains. I don't really think that's a bad thing. That if you're consuming a service that does also provide material that might not be suitable for young people, that at the point of entry into that service, you indicate whether you are over the age of 18 or 16 or 21 or whatever is kind of appropriate for that service, so that you can then enjoy that service as it was intended to be enjoyed by your age group. So I might choose not to listen to explicit content. So when I've got some background party music on, I turn that off. If I'm just listening in my office, then maybe I'll turn it on. But I kind of have that choice. But young people shouldn't really have that choice of listening to kind of bad language or other material that may be not suitable for them to listen to. So in that sense, it kind of makes, to me at least, it makes sense, and it's not a big effort to share that information. It is something that can be provided quite quickly. And again, the ultimate objective here is to keep young people safe. It's not about profiling customers. It's not about harvesting huge amounts of data, and that data just isn't available at that point. So there's there isn't really that incentive. On the question of privacy, again, the whole design here is that we're just providing an age over indicator. So it isn't providing a date of birth. It isn't providing name or location or any other data that you could see could be useful in a kind of big data sense. But we're just not providing. It's not just Luciditi. It's all of us that are kind of operating under this certification scheme. All of us are minimizing the data, so there isn't the ability to overshare data. And again, I'm not sure that the overreach is going to be a particular concern. You're right, though. Organizations do really need to assess carefully what data they're capturing, what services they're providing, and whether they should really implement an age assurance in order to kind of focus on the key objective here, which is to keep young people safe and to ensure that they are enjoying the same experiences as the rest of us do, but in an age-appropriate manner.
It's interesting. I sometimes think that what's happening is we're trying to replace the role of scheduling, right? When we were young, all the stuff that was blue, so to speak, was on after 9:30, and so the kids were in bed. Now we have this constant flow of information. Do you think people have just gotten used to the idea that you should be able to see anything or listen to anything anytime?
I don't know. I mean, there is quite a lot of concern, just from reading forums, and particularly from parents, about the concern that they're attempting to lock down devices, and they're attempting to turn on filtering on their routers and so on. But they're kind of aware that our the kind of younger generation, they're a lot more tech savvy than we are, and they know how this stuff works. I had to keep the password. So my youngest son, he's 18 now. So he largely manages the technology around our house. So we've got a home automation system and so on. He kind of largely manages all of that. But I've never given him the password to the router, ever. And I probably won't. He's an adult now, so maybe I will. But I don't want him making changes to that. I keep the content that comes into the house safe. And I intend to, I see that that's my job as a dad. And I think that lots of parents kind of see it the same way. So I don't see that parents or others particularly have a challenge about the kind of level of protection that we're offering and providing. And also, I don't think that there is a kind of underlying sentiment that that we've kind of just got used to this information just being out there. I mean, most of us are of the generation where there was a watershed. When before kind of streaming was invented and before on-demand television kind of came about. So we're kind of used to that. I wrote an article fairly recently about the Online Safety Act being kind of the equivalent of of placing dirty magazines on the top shelf of newsagents. So it's kind of the same thing. So we know this material is there. We don't want to impinge on people's rights to be able to obtain that material, providing that they're of a suitable age to do so. So putting magazines up on the top shelf keeps them out of the sight and reach of physically out of the reach of young people. And so what we're really doing here is applying that same rule about a kind of watershed or keeping things out of the reach by putting them on the top shelf, by implementing a digital solution that means that only people who are of age should be able to consume that content. And I've not seen really any significant pushback on kind of implementing these methods. Obviously, there are people that are concerned about freedom of speech and their rights to be able to consume the information. And I genuinely believe that what we're doing here is not impinging on that in any way, shape, or form. In fact, there's lots of court cases that are discussing exactly this point. That it isn't taking away anybody's right to do anything at all. It's just protecting young people.
I like your metaphor of the top shelf. And it strikes me that in that scenario, VPNs, and I may be giving a little bit too much away here, VPNs are the equivalent of sort of snatching the magazine and taking it off to a rock in the forest where you and your friends sort of gather and go, look, we got a dirty magazine, which is to say it's still illegal. You've shoplifted it. So
yeah.
The VPN is sort of the shoplifting of the digital age. Is you've got to make an effort to get around those.
I think you're right. So again, if we go back to the kind of core objective of this, which is preventing young people from inadvertently stumbling upon material that is harmful to them given their age, if those young people willfully attempt to access that material. So let's say, for example, all countries all around the world all implement legislation that requires age assurance at the point of entry if that service is providing age-restricted material. So therefore, VPNs will no longer be effective. It's almost certain that young people, clever young people, will find some other way around the blocks, and then we'll have to come up with some other solution. We're promoting digital skills and technology. They're really smart people. They're going to be figuring this stuff out. But you're right. They are breaking the law by doing so, and they're willfully attempting to access the material. Rather than inadvertently stumbling upon it, which is the core objective.
There's so much to discuss in this. I wonder sometimes if, our kids not just going to generate AI porn? And then that leads to the question of age gates for large language models, which is starting to happen. But I want to focus for a minute on not the UK and not the US, which is also its own sort of tangle of age assurance laws, but Australia and the recently published final report of the age assurance technology trial. Do you have thoughts on the final report? What was your response to it when it was published?
So we were really pleased with it. So it was a significant effort. It was very broad in its remit. So there were a large number of providers that were that contributed into the analysis and investigation, and ultimately the output is great. So it shows that age assurance is appropriate, it is technically deliverable, and it kind of makes sense. So there's there's a lot of both qualitative and quantitative analysis in the report, all of which are particularly helpful. So there's a really good sense of how people think about age assurance and whether they feel that it's appropriate, as well as technically, can it actually be done, and what would be the impact on the user experience as a result of introducing it. All of which came out as very positive. And that then led to the implementation of age assurance, which I believe is due to come in on the 10th of December. So ultimately, the report did its job, which was to inform decision makers and policymakers about what was possible, and then provide them with the tools to then go ahead and implement it.
So, given what's been happening with the OSA, with the DSA in Europe, and with the EUDI wallet coming up, and MGLs and all of that playing into the discussion, what's next? What do you think is the next big step in progressing this legislation and this kind of movement to, put age checks on inappropriate content online?
Yeah. So I've been having this discussion for some time, particularly with my old boss at Mastercard, when we were starting to look at how digital identity was going to kind of get off the ground, and this is going back 9 years now. So we argued then that there was no catalytic use case for identity. That the whole point was that you could use it to prove anything about yourself to anybody or any organization for any purpose. The problem with that is it's impossible to spin up that kind of an ecosystem overnight. What we've got with the Online Safety Act and then with the changes to mandatory license conditions is a real tangible use case that actually people want. So I've not yet met a single person that enjoys the experience of scanning a bottle of wine and a packet of crisps at a self-service checkout, and then waiting for a young person to come out and tell them they look old before they can complete the purchase. So although energy drinks in the UK don't contain any legislation about age, all of the supermarkets and retailers subscribe to a voluntary code, which means that you need to be over the age of 16, I think it is, in order to purchase energy drinks. But they've all enforced that rule. And what we've observed is that at lunchtime, particularly in the city, that there are huge queues of people waiting, so scanning their can of Red Bull, their packet of crisps and their sandwich as part of their meal deal, and then waiting for somebody to just kind of come over and put the fob code in, to then let that purchase go through. So there's huge queues throughout the store as people are kind of desperately trying to grab their lunch. So with a digital form of age proof, that those queues will die down, which means the user experience will be much better. And then also the compliance costs go down because you don't need that person trying desperately to keep up with this massive throughput of people in short spaces of time. So the Online Safety Act, followed by mandatory licensing conditions, feels like the catalytic use case for the digital identity ecosystem that actually we've been looking for quite some time. People are getting comfortable with the idea of proving their age in order to access age-restricted material online, which means they're setting up reusable digital identities so they don't have to provide a facial age estimation or a online banking link or a document scan each time they access a site. They're doing it once and then sharing that proof each time. So people are getting used to the idea of this idea that digital identity is actually a really, really useful thing. And it's super, super convenient, and done well, it's privacy preserving, it's secure, and it's good. With the mandatory licensing conditions, we're going to get through the self-service checkout on a Friday evening with our bottle of wine much faster. So it's going to appeal not just to 18 to 24-year-olds, but actually the entire population, because even me, sadly, I don't look young enough to not be asked for ID anymore. I'll still, oh, thank you. So, I'm going to be able to use this as well, even as an old person. I will still use this, and it will still be valuable, and it will still save me valuable seconds in kind of getting through that process. So, what I think is going to happen is, as people get more comfortable, they worry less about the concerns that we've already talked about. So, privacy, oversharing, and overreach, and get more comfortable with using a digital identity. Their next question is going to be, well, I can now buy my pint, and I can get my wine at a self-service checkout, and I can access material on the internet. What else can I do with this? Why can't I prove my employment history? Why can't I prove my qualifications? Why can't I travel with this? Why can't, so many things that you could do. So instead of pushing the idea of a digital identity that can do everything, actually, I think there's now going to be a market pull from, okay, I've got this thing, I've set it up, I've gone through that process of setting this thing up. I want to now use it for other things and start demanding access as a result of having gone through the Online Safety Act implementation and then also the mandatory license condition changes.
It's almost like digital identity had to put on a funny hat and a fake mustache and dress up as age assurance to sort of get in the door,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I like to think that we've just found something that is genuinely useful and valuable and understandable. It's been very difficult over the years for kind of digital identity evangelists to really sell the idea. It's a little bit like if you kind of imagine 55 years ago with the invention of the credit card and saying, right, I've got this idea. You're going to be able to take a plastic card created by any bank anywhere around the world in any currency, and then use it to buy any product in any currency in any store anywhere around the world. You think, well, it's brilliant, but how are you going to do that? And it's very difficult to kind of imagine the instant creation of an ecosystem of that size. And that's really been the battle with digital identity, that we've been talking about it in terms of all of the possibilities, but not really so much in terms of the practical applications. What we have here is really practical applications. And we've seen that, people are voting with their feet. They are using a digital proof of age when interacting online. They will be using it in order to get served in a bar, a pub, or a club, and then also be using it in retail situations in order to prove their age. So that kind of confidence building is coming from real tangible use, rather than somebody saying, like, this is a good idea, why don't you give it a go?
Well, the future is bright with people with adoption, then, I think.
Yes, I think so too. And again, that's not just kind of wishful thinking on my part. That's based on empirical evidence. So if you look at the AVPA's data that it publishes from time to time, and then also when Ofcom released their next State of the Nation report, we'll see that significant numbers of people are proving their age online. And we will see, when the mandatory license conditions changes, we will see adoption of that part of digital identity, kind of component of it, really. We will see considerable adoption there too. So again, it's kind of unlocking the things that people really want to do and the things that are important to them, and then providing a solution which just happens to be called digital identity. But that part of it's kind of irrelevant, really. What we're doing is solving an actual problem, and that, I think, has been the kind of catalytic use case that we've been seeking for so long, and either by design or by sheer luck, or just coincidental timing, has meant that we're kind of at that point. So yes, I agree with you. I think the future is very bright, and kind of now's the time to get really excited about the organizations that are involved in this process, and there are a number of them, and to look at kind of what's next and where might this go.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dan, I hope that pint that you have at Christmas tastes very, very good.
It will be the best pint I have had in my life.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today. It was a great conversation. And this isn't a story that's going to end anytime soon, I don't think. So perhaps we'll touch base again in the future to talk more about age assurance and age verification and online safety and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I really look forward to that.
Thanks to Dan Johnson from Luciditi for joining us today. Learn more about Luciditi at luciditi.co.uk. And be sure to check out all of the latest age assurance, biometrics, and digital identity news at www.biometricupdate.com.